Hi everyone, welcome to Frustrated Book Purists. Today I'll be discussing a recent adaptation that has received a lot of criticism from fans of the book. The one and only Artemis Fowl. And before I keep going, just want to reiterate, these are my opinions. These are not the opinions of the Rehoboth Beach Public Library, and that goes for all of our Frustrated Book Purist episodes. They are the individual opinions of one librarian, not the whole system. Also, if you're here because you're wondering, is this movie or book suitable for my kids, since it is based off of a children's book series, I would recommend checking out Common Sense Media. They have a lot, they break down the content in movies and books aimed at kids and teens, and there's reviews posted by adults and kids saying what they thought of the movie. So that's a really good resource for parents and educators, and I will put a link to that in the description. So, back to Artemis. Artemis Fowl is a middle grade fantasy series. It's similar to Harry Potter and Percy Jackson in the sense that there's a magical world that secretly coexists with the one we know, and the child protagonist just happens to stumble across it. However, it's also very different from a lot of books with that same premise, because Artemis Fowl is not a hero in any sense of the word. He's a self-proclaimed criminal mastermind, and he's very proud of that reputation. Keep that in mind. In the first book in the series, Artemis' family has lost a bulk of their fortune because of his father's disappearance 2 years prior. They're still millionaires, though. Artemis decides that he's going to rebuild their assets by kidnapping a fairy and threatening to expose the magical world's existence unless they pay him a ton of gold. Literally, he wants a ton of gold. However, his victim, Holly Short, has no intention of waiting around for help to come, and the fairies aren't giving up their gold without a fight. So it's this fast-paced book that switches back and forth between the perspectives of Artemis, Holly, and the fairies trying to free her. The movie's plot goes like this. Artemis discovers that his father has gone missing on a business trip. Shortly afterwards, he receives a phone call from a fairy named Opal Kaboy, who claims she has kidnapped Artemis's father and will let him go in exchange for a fairy artifact called the Aculos. Artemis realizes that everything his father taught him about fairies are real. So he decides to kidnap Holly and offer her as ransom in exchange for the Aculos, which the fairies don't have because it was actually stolen from them by Artemis' dad before the events of the movie. So yeah, it's a tad different from the book. Now, before I continue, just need to ask ourselves, is this a bad thing that is different from the book? Please don't hit the back button yet and just hear me out. We're not calling this series Frustrated Book Purists for no reason. Technically, it's not a bad thing that the movie is different from the book. Books, movies, television shows, video games, stage plays, radio dramas, magazine articles, they all tell stories and they all have very different needs. A good adaptation will never be exactly like the source material. There are certain things that novels can get away with that movies can't, like relating a character's inner thoughts in a novel versus showing a close-up of an actor's facial expressions to give you an idea of what they're thinking. In other cases, there may be something about the source material that's outdated, and the adaptation works to correct this so that it remains appealing to the current audience. Like, there's stuff like racial stereotypes or sexist stereotypes, or even stuff like outdated technology, especially for this series, because there's a lot of detail about the fairies' high tech, which was a big deal in the early 2000s. But now we've come a long way where some of the stuff that Eoin Colfer is describing is yeah, our smartphones can do that. So things do need to be updated for a movie in 2020. That being said, what I want to do is break down all the ways in which the movie version of Artemis Fowl differs from the book. I mean, I'll try at least. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm definitely going to leave out a few things. I can't even tell you how many times I wrote out kind of a script for this video, and I would go back to be oh, I forgot about this, or oh, I forgot about that. They left out a lot. So I'm going to talk about what was different, and then I'm going to talk about why that wasn't a good thing for this movie. And so yeah, forgive me if I leave anything out, because boy, howdy, there was a lot. So first, the biggest thing, Artemis' character has changed beyond recognition. He's still a genius, according to the film's narrator, but he doesn't consider himself a criminal mastermind. He's not even aware that his father is a criminal mastermind. When he hears on the news that his father disappeared and there's all this speculation over Mr. Fowl's shady activities, he screams at the TV, "He's not a criminal mastermind, he's my dad!" In the books, Artemis always wears crisp business suits, and he wouldn't be caught dead wearing normal clothes unless it was part of a plan to throw somebody off guard. In the movie, he only wears a suit after he kidnaps Holly and starts negotiating with the fairies. Otherwise, he's wearing jeans and t-shirts and stuff like that. And speaking of the fairies, Artemis finds out about their existence on his own in the novel. It's treated as something he developed an interest in one day, so he spent a whole lot of time on the internet weeding out the non-credible sources and gradually gathering up concrete facts about them. He figures out that each fairy carries around a Bible called the Book of the People that explains all their rules and secrets. The novel begins in Vietnam with Artemis having just located a copy of the book, which he then proceeds to translate on his own using his family's technology. And once he has that translated, he has all their information about them. He knows what their limits are, what they can and can't do, and he exploits it like nobody's business. In the movie, Artemis knows a lot about fairies and what they can and can't do because his dad taught him a lot about fairies. There's a quick reference to the Book of the People, but movie Artemis can't translate it because it's written in Gnomish and it's encoded. And that's just too complicated for him. Oh, you poor book. So then, Book Artemis also prefers to stay away from physical action as much as possible. Most of the time, he relies on his loyal bodyguard Butler to take care of any and all threats. He spends the majority of the novel in the command center that he's created for himself, watching the hostage situation as it unfolds, and relaying strategies to Butler and Butler's sister Juliet through walkie-talkies. Movie Artemis still isn't much of an action hero, but he does get more involved in action scenes and fights off some of the fairies himself. We're going to be here for a very long time if I keep talking about Artemis' character, so let's move on to other things. The plot changes in many key areas. Mr. Fowl's disappearance had nothing to do with the fairies, and Opal Kaboy wasn't introduced until Book 2, The Arctic Incident. Also, I gotta say, her schemes in Book 2 and 4 were much more complicated and deadly than they were in the movie, where she just stands around in the darkness and sends threatening messages to Artemis. Ooh. Briar Cudgeon, who's her accomplice in the movie, he was a character in Book 1, but he wasn't an ally of Opal Kaboy yet. The events of Book 1 are actually what caused him to become the main villain of Book 2, whereas in the movie it's kind of alluded that he already had his fall from grace and now he's trying to use this as an opportunity to get back in with them. While he does disagree with Commander Root and sends a troll into Fowl Manor, it's not to cause a distraction for Opal, it's because he wants to take over the operation and become the hero of the hour, thus earning himself a promotion. He's still a jerk since he doesn't care who gets hurt as long as he looks good, arguably a sexist jerk as well because he doesn't think Holly's life is worth saving, but he's not a traitor yet. Give it time, movie. There's no Aculos in the book series either. I couldn't even begin to tell you what the Aculos is or what it does, except that it's some very powerful magical device that someone could use to take over the world. It's just something that the fairies and Artemis want. In the first book, it's all about gold, which I might add doesn't require any explanation in regards to what it is or why anyone would want it, as opposed to this Aculos. There's also a very important step in fairy negotiations that gets cut from the movie. So, to explain, as it's stated in the book, if in the fairy society that the book sets up, if a fairy gets abducted, the fairy police, known as the LEP, send a retrieval squad to get them back. Butler takes out the squad with no problems in the book and the movie. Second, if the retrieval squad fails, the LEP frees time and have someone come to do negotiations. That happens in the movie as well. Third, if negotiations fail and the hostage cannot be returned safely, the fairies detonate a biobomb that kills everything within a pinpoint location. Now, in the book, Artemis tells the fairies that he knows about the biobomb and isn't concerned about it. He says he's figured out a way to escape from the time stop and the biobomb. The fairies protest. There is no way to escape the time stop. He insists that he found a way and he's going to do it. Then he reminds the negotiator, Commander Root, that nobody has permission to enter Fowl Manor while I'm alive. Fairies in Artemis's world are bound by certain rules. Like Dracula, they can't enter a house without permission. So when they hear Artemis say that they can't enter while he's alive, they eventually realize he's left a loophole that they can exploit. They technically have permission to enter if he's dead. So the fairies pretend to surrender, they pay the ransom, Artemis releases Holly. As soon as she's clear, they send the biobomb into Fowl Manor, and they assume they'll be able to waltz into the manor after he's dead, recollect the ransom, and go home. Win, win, win. Except they can't. As soon as they try to re-enter the manor, the fairies become sick, like they start throwing up and they get dizzy and stuff, because they can't enter the manor. Artemis Fowl is still alive. He found a way to escape the time stop just as he told them he would. So his statement that nobody can enter while I'm alive was bait to trick the fairies into doing exactly what they did. Now he has the gold, and they still can't enter the manor. He outsmarted them. In the movie, Artemis still drops that lie during negotiations, but nothing actually comes out of it. There's no mention of a biobomb. The fairies never consider killing Artemis and re-entering the mansion after he's dead. It's just something he says. The end. And so a few more important things. Nobody refers to Butler as Butler in the movie. He's either called by his first name, Domovoy, or Dom. And this is a bigger deal than you think because while Butler is actually the man's last name, it's not just his title, he's not supposed to reveal his first name to Artemis because Artemis is his client and they're not supposed to get attached to their clients. He does eventually reveal his name in a later book, and only because he thinks he's about to die. And this has an important impact on events in the series. Like, it's a big deal. And then in the movie, they're just like, don't ever call him Butler. You have to call him Domovoy. I'm like, okay. There are also some changes in regards to casting with the character's gender and ethnicity. In the book, Holly is described as having nut brown skin. She's white in the movie. Butler is described as Eurasian, and he's black in the movie. And Commander Root, Holly's boss, is a man in the books. In the movie, Root is played by Dame Judi Dench. So when I heard that Root had been recast as a woman, my first thought was that they must be throwing out the whole subplot where Holly is the first recon officer on the force. The first female recon officer on the force. And then I started thinking, well, maybe not. Maybe they were going to change it so that Root was the first female officer and Holly is following in her footsteps. There's a scene at the beginning of the book where Root summons Holly to his office and he tells her he's constantly on her case because he knows she's going to be judged more harshly than anyone else on the force, and he doesn't think she's giving the job everything that she's got. So I thought, oh, maybe the people making the movie want to change that scene to reflect on how prejudices can change over time and how just because Root broke barriers doesn't mean everything's solved and Holly still has to deal with sexism in the workplace. And maybe Root would lecture Holly on how hard she had to work to give elves like Holly a chance to join the LEP. And she thinks Holly is squandering that opportunity. Like, oh, that could be pretty interesting. Nope. Nothing like that happens. Holly's just another officer on the force, and there is no mention of sexism at all. Yay. And also, while we're on the subject, Holly and Artemis are not forever friends. They are enemies in the book because he kidnapped her, and she treats him like such. She does not like him. So yeah, there are a lot of changes. So now we get back to what's the big deal? Is that a bad thing or not? So this is all personal opinion, but I think the book had a tighter plot than the movie. Artemis's motivation doesn't need to be explained in any great depth in the book. He wants gold. Lots of people would like to have a ton of gold. Granted, in the movie, his desire to save his father is also something that audiences can easily understand. However, the movie's never clear on the Aculos. What does it do? How would it help Opal take over the world? How does it allow Holly to bring back Artemis's father? It's a shiny MacGuffin. Second, we have the characters. The characters are vibrant in the books. They have so much personality. You have fun reading about them and watching them butt heads with each other. And granted, the author, Eoin Colfer, does go into great detail describing how Artemis is a criminal genius, Butler is a deadly force of nature, Foley's a tech wizard, etc. But then he backs it up by showing how good they are via the events in the story. Whereas in the beginning of the movie, the narrator, Mulch Diggums, tells the audience, do not underestimate the kid. And so far, so good. And then we watch as Artemis is fed information about the fairies from Butler and his father's journal instead of figuring everything out himself. All the many, many ways that Artemis outsmarts the fairies in the novel, like decoding the Book of the People, or hijacking the technology that he finds in Holly's helmet, or escaping the time stop, all of that evidence that he's a criminal mastermind just gets removed from the movie. Instead, we are told that Artemis arranged the whole kidnapping Holly scheme because he wanted the fairies to send a dwarf into the manor to get her out. He's read that dwarves are naturally drawn to treasure in the movie, so he basically wants the dwarf to find the Aculos for him because his dad hid it somewhere in the house and he can't find it himself. Are you trying to tell me that Artemis Fowl, the criminal genius, the one you're not supposed to underestimate, couldn't figure out how to unlock his dad's safe? Oh yes, that boy sure is a genius. Wow, look at him go. Show, don't tell is one of the biggest rules in writing. It's not enough to tell your audience that a character is smart or funny or intimidating. You have to show examples of the character being smart, funny, or intimidating within the story. Otherwise, the story just becomes less credible and engaging. We're told in the book and the movie how intimidating Butler is. And in the book, we see him take out a full-grown troll mostly by himself with some help from Holly. We see him take out hordes of enemies that no one person should be able to take out on their own. Whereas in the movie, he spends most of the fight trying to survive the troll while protecting Artemis and Juliet, and the biggest thing he does in the troll fight is push Artemis out of the way so he doesn't get crushed to death. Also, in the book, we're shown how good Holly is at her job despite the mistakes she makes. We see how she manages to escape from her prison cell by herself and give Artemis some trouble before the troll shows up. In the movie, he lets her out. They bond over their missing dads after a few quick exchanges of dialogue, and Artemis decides to trust her based on that. And then they become forever friends. This leads me back to Artemis himself. He's what makes the series so unique. He's the child protagonist, but he's the villain. His redemption arc takes place over the course of the books. There's 7 books in the series, and it happens gradually over time. Whereas in the movie, that arc is non-existent. In the movie, Artemis is no different from any plucky young fantasy hero, and that's a problem. The movie took everything that was fun, clever, exciting, and unique about Artemis Fowl. They just took all of it away, and just like going back to how Artemis always wears business suits in the book. On the surface, it's a minor detail to leave out, but it's one of the things that makes him so unique. And whenever a movie like this comes out, accusations get thrown around about what happened, and it usually comes back to some of the people behind the movie took out elements of the book that they didn't think would appeal to mass audiences. And in fact, I believe the director, Kenneth Branagh, was interviewed before the movie came out. He was asked, why isn't Artemis a villain here? And he said that because it was a Disney film, he felt a certain responsibility to young audiences that he couldn't portray a child doing bad things, or acting like a villain. Like, he wanted to treat it as more of an origin story of how he becomes a criminal mastermind. But I think when people do stuff like this, it's like people are saying, like, oh, they were trying to have the next Harry Potter, so they went with all the things that they thought fit that mold of being the next family-friendly Harry Potter franchise, and then they throw out all the things that don't fit that mold because then that would be a risk. And that is the exact opposite of what they should be doing. Hollywood, are you looking for the next Harry Potter? If so, can I offer you some advice? Stop looking for the next Harry Potter. Twilight, for all its flaws, wasn't the next Harry Potter. It was Twilight, and the people who were making that movie understood that, and it was a huge success. The Hunger Games wasn't the next Twilight. I remember seeing articles like, is Twilight the next Harry Potter? Is Hunger Games the next Twilight? They weren't. They were their own thing. Harry Potter is its own thing. And for better or worse, the people making the movies did their best to stay as faithful to the books as possible. And they succeeded, financially at least. These kinds of book adaptations, they need to capitalize on what makes their book series unique. And Artemis Fowl should have been pitch perfect for this. It's nothing like Harry Potter. It's a fantasy heist series starring a villainous child, not a wide-eyed, wholesome hero. Had Disney chosen to focus on this instead of making Artemis just like everyone else, they could have made something really special. Because if you want to have a successful adaptation, you can't rely on what makes the book similar to other successes. You need to embrace what makes that book unique. Otherwise, you have a boring carbon copy of something that people have already seen, and therefore they have no interest in it. So that's my rant about Artemis Fowl. Stay tuned. We're planning to do an episode of Frustrated Book Purists once a month. Not all of them will be rants. Some of them we actually like the adaptation. But yeah, so stay tuned for that, and have a good day.